Steven Spielberg's semi-autobiographical love letter to cinema. Is it any good, and how does it measure up against the rest of his work? Feel free to like and subscribe, and let's do this. So essentially, The Fablemans is about a young Jewish boy coming of age in the late 50s and 60s. It's essentially the story of a young kid who's a bit of an outsider when it pertains to his broader surroundings. Of course, it's semi-autobiographical. It's pretty much is Steven Spielberg, but they've changed the name from Steven Spielberg to Sam Fableman. First generation boomer, falling in love with cinema, Jewish background, moving across the United States. A kid who's a bit on the outside, juggling cinema versus a slightly imperfect family, but not really dysfunctional, just like problems like any other family, but notable problems. The parents aren't the best match. That's the movie in a nutshell. In terms of comparables, when it relates to Spielberg's other work, for me, and this might be strange for other people, I'd say Hook. Hook, no! The reason why I say that is because Hook is about Peter Pan, the young who becomes a grown-up, and then rediscovering that inner child, that youth, because he's just been lost in responsibilities and work and career and ambition, right? And this, The Fablemans, is like a eulogy movie where Spielberg now, at the twilight of his life, looking back at his youth. It's looking back from reverence of, okay, I've become one of the greatest movie directors of all time. Let me really make a semi-autobiographical movie about how it all came to be. Hook is about a middle-aged man looking back, trying to recapture the spirit of youth. The Fablemans is about an old-aged man in the twilight of his life looking back to his youth, as that was the point that made his life what it was. So I'd say Hook, for me, is the most comparable to me in terms of the allegorical themes. Of course, outside of that, this wasn't a sci-fi movie, fantasy adventure. It's like kind of realism. There's no spaceships in this. There's no flying anything. Outside of that, in terms of other movies, for me, I'm going to say to you that The Fablemans is essentially if Cinema Paradiso and Armageddon Time had a baby, this was what would come out. As in, Armageddon Time, which came out at the end of last year, was another film, a Jewish kid coming of age period piece. Personally, I felt Armageddon Time worked a little bit better than The Fablemans because it just was what it was. The Fablemans was a more ambitious, more masterful movie, but in terms of finished execution, Armageddon Time was a little bit better because it was more concise. Jewish kid, first generation Gen X in 1980, growing up in New York City, you know, the grittiness of Queens 1980 as opposed to middle America. Cinema Paradiso is like another love letter to cinema about a kid growing up in Sicily in the, post-World War II years, immediate post-World War II years, falling in love with the medium of film, a love letter to cinema. It's like a movie about loving movies. But that was a classic, and the difference between Cinema Paradiso and Fablemans is you've got to remember Spielberg is now at the twilight of his career. He's not in his prime, basically, whereas the Italian director who done Cinema Paradiso, Giuseppe Tornaberry, I can't remember his name, Giuseppe something. That guy was in his prime when he done Cinema Paradiso. But The Fablemans was just meant to be a nice little love letter to Spielberg's youth, and he's definitely earned it. He's been the best director of the past 40 years, 50 years almost. He's kind of earned it. Cinema Paradiso is a little bit better, but again, that was the director in his prime making the movie that he was born to make.
The film that we've waited 45 years for Steven Spielberg to make. No, it isn't. No, it isn't.
Spielberg was born to make E.T. and Close Encounters and Jaws and Indiana Joneses and Jurassic Park, etc., etc. His body of work speaks for itself. He was not born to make The Fablemans, but I guess he earned the right to make The Fablemans.
The film that we've waited 45 years for Steven Spielberg to make. No, it isn't. No, it isn't.
In terms of the movie's weaknesses, I'm going to say it was a bit all over the place. It's like two different movies, or it's kind of a Netflix 3-part limited series type. It goes from New Jersey, when he's a kid, to Arizona to California. It was like pieces from different movies that could have been really good stuck into one film. So that was the weakness for me. Too many different eras put together, but it didn't have a smooth tapestry of beginning, middle and an end for me. In terms of the movie's strengths, personally, as a fan of Spielberg from the 80s, in the 80s you had E.T. and then you had a bunch of other films Back to the Future, this, that. As a kid, you thought Spielberg was attached to all the high school movies. So as a young'un, I just thought, oh, Spielberg made all these great high school films. The Goonies. I'm just saying, Spielberg, even though he didn't do that many high school, I don't even know if he done one high school film in the 80s, but you just felt like he was the king of that genre of kids going to high school. What I'm getting to is Spielberg was the king of the 80s, right? And so many high school 80s movies. So the part of The Fablemans where he is in high school in California when he moves from Arizona and dealing with the jocks, but in the 60s Beach Boy era jocks, not 80s Karate Kid era jocks. That was the most entertaining for me. The young Jewish kid moves to California in senior high school, facing this kind of these 1960s California jock types who are a bit anti-Semitic and so forth. The scene where the jock confides that he's not infallible, he's not perfect, the scene towards the end, that was like 30 years condensed into half an hour. But again, this is a eulogetic type movie. The strength for me was the high school bit, although there are a lot of good bits. Essentially, this is Spielberg's home video. This is Spielberg's home movie.
It is both a strength and a weakness. It is a very expensive home movie.
So essentially, The Fablemans isn't a masterpiece. It's good, it's not great. But what a lot of people have said, specifically Mark Kermode and that, is
very expensive home movie.
To me, the biggest takeaway from this being a Spielberg home movie is when George Lucas was at the premiere of The Force Awakens, after we all knew he wasn't the talent we maybe thought he was back in the 80s, the awkward interviewer says,
so what have you been up to lately? You're
working on my own films.
Yeah, anything we can hear about yet? Anything on the... No.
They'll never be seen by anybody. Wow. They're just films for myself. And my friends.
Your friend? You got problems?
I like that.
Leave me alone, I'll make my own movies, but only I'm going to like them because I'm not that talented, so go away. But the implication at the same time is, my movies are so esoteric, you morons wouldn't understand them.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by.
What's the matter with you?
So my thing with Spielberg is, he can make a home movie, and he doesn't have to hide it. First of all, he's going to actually make a home movie. He's not lazy like Lucas. He's going to get the job done, number one. Number two, if he makes a home movie, it's going to be good, not great, but it's going to be good enough to come out at the cinema and people like me say, oh, that was not bad. Because obviously, we now know years later, Spielberg is a lot better than Lucas. Whereas, especially in the early 80s, people were holding them on par. So essentially, Spielberg is good enough to make a home movie that's good, not great, where Lucas will talk about it and it really means leave me alone, I'm past it, I'm not that talented.
It's my story. That's why I'm the only one who's gonna watch it.
And my friends.
What's the matter with you?
In terms of the performances in The Fablemans, I've got to say the kid playing Sam Fableman, essentially the Spielberg character. So I thought he was familiar when I was watching it in the cinema. And I'm like, oh, that's the kid from American Gigolo, right? It was a heart-on-sleeve, honest, emotional, good performance. Nothing bad to say about the kid who played Sam Fableman. For me, the standout role was actually Michelle Williams out of Blue Valentine playing the mother role. Obviously, anyone who knows my channel knows I've done a Blue Valentine video a few years ago. Her performance in The Fablemans makes me appreciate more her performance in Blue Valentine.
Yeah, still do whatever I could do. What does that mean, potential? Potential for what?
You have such capacity.
Because in Blue Valentine, I just believed her as the character, but now watching this, and her kind of theatrical, middle-aged mother type performance in The Fablemans makes me look back at Blue Valentine and I can appreciate her range a little bit more. The old school Jewish great uncle, those were the standout performances, for me personally. Steven Spielberg's legacy is so potent and powerful over the course of my lifetime. He certainly earned the right to make a home movie, even if it is a bit flawed. Of course he's earned the right. His body of work is ridiculous. Jurassic Park, mate. I remember going to see Jurassic Park. Saving Private Ryan, for heaven's sake, brother. Spielberg, even his lower movies like The Terminal, you think to yourself, rah, that was a banging film, and The Terminal's like a low-key movie. The legacy of Spielberg is, Spielberg's probably the best director of the past 40, emerging 50 years.
I can't remember what my parents look like.
I wish I had a dad.
You're all my lost boys. I'll never forget you. Never.
So legacy-wise, his legacy is so powerful that of course he's earned the right to make what you could call an indulgence piece. Is it an indulgence piece? It's like a superior indulgence piece. It is a little bit, but he's such a good director that it's not just Hollywood licking its own arse.
And that is George Lucas. George, wherever you are. Thank you, George.
Gotta celebrate life, man. We're breathing, we're walking, it's incredible.
Some of the distressing issues that we are facing collectively.
My mum met my dad, they had sex. It's amazing. Like, do you know what I'm saying? I'm here.
Accept your little award, thank your agent and your God, and
Spielberg made a movie that was good, not great. It was well deserved. It wasn't as concise as it could have been, but it was well worth coming out, and it was well worth seeing a Spielberg picture in the cinema. I'm gonna give it a 7, dead on 7. I can't give it any higher than that, but I wouldn't give it any lower. Definitely not a masterpiece, but the masterful components that were in this movie, it's a solid 7 for me. That's my Fablemans review. If you've made it to the end of the review, I say as I always say, thank you very much. I can't say anything other than feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one, whatever that next one is. Peace.